on and screen share. And you'll notice the title of this chapter is called Building Relationships Through Communicating Supportively. And so it's interesting that we're talking about the topic of communication, but really, in reality, we're talking about building effective work relationships. And another way of talking about some of this chapter is how can you give negative feedback to somebody else and still leave the other person feeling okay and positive, which is kind of another way of thinking about building relationships. The relationship between the sender and receiver is really key in communication. And it's the characteristics by which managers are judged in their career. It's one of the main characteristics. And probably 80% of your waking time is spent around communication issues. Most of us do feel we're good communicators, but the lack of communication is perceived as a result of the other's weaknesses. That's one of our biases in communication. A lot of interpersonal communication has not advanced as quickly as our technical capabilities have. And interpersonal problems tend to be the roadblock to effective communication. And I think we're existing in a world today I'm not familiar with, which I think's largely been brought on by the media, of communication going awry, and really creating a lot of barriers between us. And I think some of these principles I'm going to be talking about anyway are pretty fundamental as to what is happening and not happening in our communications, even on a broader level in our society. A lot of positive interpersonal relationships, they lead to better health, much higher productivity. Our emotions have a strong impact on relations. You ever hear of the expression emotional contagion? Anyone want to hazard a guess of what's meant there? Emotional contagion. I'll say it this way, I don't know if you've seen it in groups, but emotions are contagious. I mean, you can walk in and feel the climate in a group, or you've ever been around a group where a really negative person walks into the room and just seems to suck the energy out of the room. That's emotional contagion happening, impacted by relationship. Emotional labor is another kind. Any of you that are salespeople may experience emotional labor. That means you really have to repress emotions when dealing with other people. Any of you that have been a waiter or a waitress in your career knows what I mean when dealing with nasty customers. It's not difficult to build positive relationships with people we like. However, building positive relationships in negative situations or with negative people requires special skill, and it's a special skill of communication. This chart I took from the book, which I think is a pretty good one. It talks about many of our relationships are short, quick, but building up the work relationship and relationships is really dependent on a lot of high quality connections we have with each other. And these are some of the characteristics of good connections. If the engagement is respectful, and you can send a message when you communicate with another of if they're valued or have worth, or if you respect them. Sometimes we do this through our body language. Our body language is one of the ways we communicate. If that communication facilitates the other person doing their job, doesn't cause the other's emotions to get in the way. If there's kind of a sense of trust going on in the connection, you convey to the other person that I really count on you. And then if there's kind of a sense of fun in the interaction, think about it a minute. Many of positive interactions with people have a lightheartedness to them. There's a sense of fun happening. So just some things to think about. The real backdrop of good, effective communication is building good work relationships. One of the biggest obstacles when we communicate with each other is a sense of defensiveness that may create it in the other person. And anytime you're in a situation and you feel under attack or threatened, what happens is communication kind of goes out the window and self-protection takes over. And we spend a lot of energy defending ourselves rather than on listening or understanding a communication. Aggression and anger and competitiveness are all the result of a communication. And you probably can come up with a ton of examples for this. Another obstacle is disconfirmation. Sometimes if we're uncomfortable with the communication, it may cause us to rob our sense of confidence, or we tend to feel insignificant or incompetent. And a lot of times then we put a lot of energy in trying to reestablish our self-worth. We engage in behaviors that say, hey, wait a minute, that's not right. Here's why I'm important. Here's what, etc. Withdrawal or self-centered behavior or loss of motivation are many times results of made to feel unworthy or incompetent. So these are, I think when these things happen, when you feel disconfirmation or defensiveness in your part, it tends to shut off the communication. Or if the other person feels these things, you might as well hang it up because no good communication is happening. So, and in many ways, I'm talking about that tendency to evaluate and judge. Carl Rogers, a very famous psychologist, said the single greatest barrier to effective communication is the tendency to evaluate and judge others. And then we can get into a lot of other discussions, which we don't have time for. Poor listening. I could spend a lot of tonight talking about the skill of listening. Just semantics when we communicate with each other. And many of you that are working in real diverse international environments might see the semantics coming into play in communication. Roughly, in interpersonal communication, roughly, I've seen the number 75% of the message is conveyed non-verbally. That's why emails and texts and things like that are real problematic in communication. There's no non-verbal. So the person who receives an email or a text message is free to interpret it any way they want. So those are some of the barriers we find. I don't know if I sent you a little case I wanted to discuss tonight. It's not a complicated case. And I'm going to put it up here on the screen, and we can go through it. But there's 3 words I'm going to throw at you as we begin to look at this case. And I'm going to ask you to as we read this case, I'm going to ask you to identify assumptions. And so what are assumptions? Assumptions are really your belief system. They're your values, your attitudes, your beliefs about how a given person should behave or be in a certain situation. So you have all kinds of assumptions about how I should behave as a teacher, and I have all kinds of assumptions about how you should behave as a student. Generally, we don't talk about these assumptions, but they're there in the background all the time. The second thing that happens in a conversation I'll ask you to talk about is a perception. And it's what you actually see, hear, or perceive taking place in a given situation. It's what you actually see. So your perception is correct, probably, because it's yours. It's the truth. But you compare that perception against what you think should be happening in a situation. So you perceive something, and does it align with your assumption? And then I'm doing the same thing. And then the third thing that's taking place when we're communicating are feelings. And feelings are the emotive or affective response a person has in reaction to what's happening in a given situation. Feelings are what you feel, which are triggered by what you see taking place. So in any communication, these 3 things are going on. So as we do these cases, I'm going to ask you to try and step back and identify these 3 things. One of the things I want to, the case is Tom and Steve. Did you get a chance to read it? I sent it to you today. I didn't know if you had a chance to read it or not, but we'll get through it here again. Let me bring it up. Can you see that okay on the screen?
Yep.
I'll go down through it with you. And I'll just follow this. Tom Ellery was the vice president, and Steve Watson was a regional vice president of sales. And this guy, Steve, and Tom are the cases are about. Steve reported to a manager, so he's 2 reports down in the rank. And then Tom, as the vice president, was following Steve's career. He considered him one of the best sales managers. Steve's name came up to Tom when he received a memo asking for recommendations for someone to take over the marketing services department. So Tom was looking out there to find an up-and-comer, and he thought Steve might be good. Now, this marketing services area employs about 400 people. It provided promotional support, special services to the sales. The position that he was looking for was 1 step higher than what Steve was making. Tom felt Steve was the ideal candidate for several reasons. A lot of people felt this services division was unresponsive. Department was now more of a bottleneck. And Tom thought Steve's extensive experience as a sales manager would give him a clear idea of the kind of support that the department needed to provide. So he thought Steve could really turn this department around. This department had began to suffer from an image problem, which Steve could correct. Marketing services has a reputation for a place being where people were assigned when they ceased to be effective in product management or the sales. And Tom felt that putting an acknowledged comer like Steve in charge of the department would go far in dispelling that image. And the position would provide Steve with an opportunity for wider corporate exposure, and which he could influence the local company marketing and sales efforts. So after consulting with his direct reports, Tom up and sent Steve a copy of the original memo with a note that said, in caps, "Are you interested? I think you're the best person for the job. Come by and let's talk about it." And Tom was very pleased that his own division was finally strong enough to allow him the flexibility to offer one of his best men to another division. And it had taken 3 years of systematically identifying the weak spots and moving strong new people like Steve into positions. So that's the case. And if I ask you, and you can either put in chat or unmute yourself and just speak up. I'm looking for saying the word assumptions. What are some assumptions Tom is having? The
I
boss.
guess, oh, I'm sorry. I guess Tom, Steve's never done marketing before, so he's assuming that he'd, you know, be naturally good at that kind of thing.
So he's assuming Steve would be really good.
Yeah, without really testing, his marketing savvy.
Okay. So Steve would be good in the job from everything I've heard. That's an assumption. Any other assumptions? They're pretty clearly laid out there, Tom's assumptions. What are some other assumptions he's making?
Another assumption would be that comer mentality would go away. So like just because he's new, like there's no info, like maybe his sales division isn't doing great, but he's like kind of dragging a dead horse, so to speak, along with him. And Tom's like, okay, he's making this division really, really good that hasn't been good, or making them at least palpable, or like,
So an assumption is Tom would really, or Tom is assuming Steve would really turn this department around.
Yeah, specifically on the image, like he's a newer
Yeah.
employee, but he's still there for some time. So it's like, okay, maybe like it's still the worst division or something. So like maybe it doesn't necessarily remove that facade.
You're saying that's Tom's assumption.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Tom's are pretty clearly laid out. What are some assumptions he's making about Steve?
I feel like he thinks that Steve is more of a fixer. Like he mentions that he believes he can come in and like kind of transform this department.
So Steve's a fixer. Steve could transform it. Okay. Any other assumptions he's making?
Is he assuming that Steve wants the job, like in the first place?
Yeah, there's a couple things he's assuming Steve wants the job. It's a promotion. It's one step higher. Isn't that an assumption of any employee we make? That they would want a promotion? I'm sure I'm assuming all of you would want that, whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. So that's an assumption he's making. Steve's going to want to change. What kind of feelings are associated with Tom? Could you identify some feelings? Think of the assumptions you're talking about. So how would Tom feel?
He feels he's an ideal candidate.
Well, that's an assumption, Shamika. Steve's an ideal. That's an assumption. What feeling would go along with that? Anger, joy, comfort? That,
I guess that would make him that well happiness, I guess, because he's feeling that he's going to come in and be able to handle the job. So joy, happiness.
happy. Well, at the end of the case, it said Tom was pleased. Okay, so that's a feeling. I'm feeling pleased about things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think what I'm getting at is there's we have assumptions and there's feelings. He's probably feeling pretty comfortable. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Now let's switch over to a minute and Steve, they're not identified here, but put yourself in Steve's position. What are some assumptions? Okay, so you're Steve, and you get this memo not from your boss, but from your boss's boss. And as Steve, what are some assumptions that you might make? I'm asking you to guess them. Anyone want to take a?
I guess he might, without context, think that he's performing like poorly and he's being shipped off to this department that,
Okay.
where all the
So
bad employees go.
one of the things, okay, so that's an assumption Steve might have. I'm performing poorly and I'm getting shipped off. That's with the context of what's in the memo, I guess. That marketing services is a place where you go to die. Is there any other assumption? Could Steve have the opposite assumption? What's a positive assumption he could have?
Well, given the message that he received, like, are you interested? I think you're the best person for this job. Like he's receiving these this positive feedback from a higher up, not just one above him, but a couple above him. So it's like, oh wow, maybe I am right for this job. Maybe I can do something. They have this negative opinion about sales. There's a disconnect there. So maybe I can do something about that.
All right, good. They're recognizing me for my ability. Hey, I'm a good guy. They're finally going to give me a chance. That's a legitimate assumption he could have. Katie, what would be a feeling with your assumption he might have?
Maybe some disappointment or, even anger.
Okay, disappointment, anger, maybe fear. Doug, what are some feelings that might go along with your assumption?
Aside from like feeling happy about like, wow, I've been recognized, maybe about nervousness. It's a new department. I haven't been involved in this. Anxiety about that as well.
All right, so I think what I'm getting at here are in any communication that's going on, these things are happening. As we go through this case, think about where you work. Is there a place where you work that is a place where that area is not like a good one to be sent to? Okay, let me bring up part 2, then we'll analyze it a little bit. Okay, why don't you take a moment to read this? Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Here's page 2 of this saga. Okay, everyone finished? All right, let's take a look at this. Let me put a third element in here, perception. What is Tom perceiving from Steve? What's Tom see Steve doing?
I think he might see Steve kind of shirking responsibility or the chance to rise to the opportunity by, I mean, not blowing the opportunity off, but declining it or having some sense of unease.
All right, Tim, now that's a little bit of an assumption that arises out of what he's seeing. What's Tom actually seeing? Sorry about that phone. What's Tom perceiving Steve doing that leads to that assumption you made, Tim? He's shirking his duty. That's more of a belief.
Yeah, I guess in the case itself, he says that Steve is both uninterested and a little curt and ill at ease.
Right.
That's just kind of, what he's seeing from the interaction.
So he didn't see him being interested, and he was real curt, real short in his sentences. And of course, Steve said he didn't think he had the background. And what did that cause him to do? That leads to action. So Tom explained more why he should take it. What's Steve perceiving in Tom? And we take a crack at that. What's Steve perceived Tom doing?
Steve might be perceiving that Tom's sending him off to this division that's set for everyone to die. So like the underperformers, the people that aren't doing so great. So he's perceiving, oh goodness, like I'm being transferred over here. Like, oh, I think you're the best for this position. Maybe this might be a falsity. Maybe I'm underperforming. So with no context to it, it might have come out of left field.
All right, so Doug, what you're describing there is all an assumption that Steve's probably making now. What's he perceived Tom doing that reinforces that assumption?
He perceives Tom to be kind of pushing him into this position, giving him all this additional reinforcement. Hey, you should do it. You should do it. So all that positivity.
So he sees Tom pushing him. He's saying, go talk to the marketing vice president. Let me explain more why you should do this. So the assumption, another assumption Steve might be making, or perception is he's not listening to me. He keeps pushing me to try and do it. What are some what are some feelings going on now? At the bottom, the last paragraph explains how Tom's feeling. Tom couldn't help feeling a little annoyed at the end of it. So Tom's annoyed and wondering if his assumptions were correct. What do you think Steve is feeling now?
Uneasy.
Good, uneasy. Katie, you probably outlined it,
Like pressured to.
I'm feeling pressured. I'm getting probably more pissed off now. All right, let's read the last two. We'll end the soap opera and you can figure out what happened. So Tom continues to perceive Steve as avoiding him, and he sees that kind of behavior, Steve behavior change, and then he later learned that that Steve left when he was first offered the job, which probably reinforces the original assumption that Katie had. Do you think this is a far-fetched example of things that happen in organizations or in communications?
No, I don't. I don't.
You want to say more, Jamaica?
Yeah, I think that stuff like this happens all more often than we probably know. Sometimes within corporations or organizations, people open up positions to people that they feel have it, and sometimes they just go through the formalities of interviewing other people or stuff like that, but really they already have in mind who they want to put in their position and for whatever their reasons are. So I think it probably does happen a little, often.
Yeah, there's we don't trust there's kind of like well, there's a lot of reasons why this came off track that I'll talk about in general about the whole process of communication. We have assumptions about it. But from what I've heard teaching this class, that they've seen things like this happen in their organizations, and where there may be offered a position that's a dead end, appears to be a dead end position, or boy, I don't want to work with that bunch of losers over there, and a lot of evaluation and judging going on. The reason I picked this, and I really believe that these three things I'm asking you to look at, assumptions, perceptions, and feelings, are really what's fundamental in any conversation going on. We all come into a conversation with assumptions. We all have perceptions about what's happening, and then there's feelings attached to it. And we bring a lot of baggage to conversations. And let me talk about some of those a minute. But before I do that, let me bring up and show you a way how you can analyze the conversation. And let me just bring up a chart. These are all available. They will be available to you to look at. Hold on a second. All right, let me okay, you could take a look at each of the characters here, and you can analyze them along the lines I did. So before the job offer, here's Tom. He has all these assumptions: going to clean up marketing, we need a good manager, the job's a challenge, Steve ought to be great. And Steve appears, I'm enthusiastic, leads to a behavior. So in communication, all this stuff leads to actions. At the interview, Steve will be pleased. All employees want a promotion, so he should be pleased. And Steve's anxious, he's not pleased. And Steve is not as flexible. Well, here's the perceptions he has. Steve appears curt, and he seems unyielding. I'm surprised, and which leads him to going into more detail with Steve, keep pushing him. And then finally, that feeling of annoyance. He finally has an assumption Steve's not as flexible. And then Steve has resigned, and he's totally astonished by him resigning. His assumptions about Steve does not match that final action. Unfortunately, I think this happens too often in a lot of organizations. And then you can look at Steve's experience. Here's Steve sitting back saying, I'm a good manager. I'm praised and promoted. I'm really satisfied with my job. Only weak managers are transferred. Marketing services, Siberia. They must think I'm weak. They must want me out of the way. So once you start down that rabbit hole, then Tom asked me to transfer. I'm surprised, anxiety, threatened, all the feelings you identified, cool and enthusiastic. Tom keeps talking about it. Tom's annoyed. He sees Tom being annoyed. Later, he's thinking, I don't have any future here. I better start looking to get out, and that's what's happening. I don't think that analysis is too far-fetched with this case. And I think what's happening, one of the reasons we don't tend to take time to step back and analyze assumptions, perceptions, and feelings in our communications, but they're going on in every communication we have. And one of the reasons we don't tend to look at them is we have these assumptions that all of us bring into a communication. And let me bring them up. And here are the assumptions we tend to make about the process of communication. So when you and I are communicating with each other, here's assumptions I'm making. I'm making an assumption that you see things the same way I do. And I'm also making an assumption that you have the same inferences or assumptions that I have. And the other assumption I'm making is that what I'm talking about in my communication is very logical. From my point of view, though, it might not be logical from your point of view, but I don't question myself because I really think you see things the way I do. You make the same inferences I do. And then we make the assumption that the other person has the same feelings that I have. Why don't you love me? I love you. You have to, all those kind of things. Or don't you think that person over there is crazy in this conversation? Aren't you annoyed with her or him the same way I am? And then here's a biggie, that communication in a given situation has little or no relation to other events in the past. Every communication is absolutely loaded with baggage. And so all of these things are going on in a conversation, which causes us not to question assumptions, perceptions, feelings. And a major barrier to communication then is the tendency to evaluate and judge. So I think what I'm saying is that if you're in a negative communication situation and you're having real problems in the communication, you might want to step back and really take a look at these things. And this has implications when we're dealing with conflict resolution with each other, when we're negotiating with people. So this dynamic of assumptions, perceptions, feelings, it's like the triangle of awareness that I talked about last week. Here's a model to kind of step back and think about if you're in a difficult communication process. So I throw that out there, and this is a famous article. This is from a famous article that was written in the Harvard Business Review probably 50 years ago. But I still think it's at the heart of the matter in communication problems we have. And then I think and I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I think it becomes even more, it becomes even more pronounced when we talk about electronic communications, which we're in. Anyone have any thoughts or questions on that? Do you agree, disagree, or does it make sense to you? Some of you that are in communication and sales. All right, let me just talk a little bit. I have a couple other examples for you that you might like, but let me talk a little bit about electronic communication, and I'm going to show you a case from there that highlights some of this. Today we're bombarded with a ton of information and communications. A lot of times we don't put our rapid fire messages in a context. And much of the information we get lacks significance or reason, or we're just getting so much thrown at us that we interpret and how we use the information. And for us to be able to effectively even interpret it, electronic messages we're receiving still depends on the relationship with the sender. That's important. That relationship with the sender is still important, even in the electronic world. And here's a quote: to make the most of electronic communication requires learning to communicate better face to face. I really believe this, that learning how the dynamics of face to face will help us a little more in electronic. On the next slide, I'm going to put up here for you is an actual email from a CEO to all managers in an organization. And I want you to think of yourself as the manager getting this email. How would you react? What feelings would you have? And think of 2 or 3 words that immediately come to mind to describe the CEO sending the email. As you read this, think of what feeling comes to mind or thoughts you have. There's no changes have been made to this. Is the way the email came. And when we look at it, I'll stop and ask you for reaction. The name of the company is Cerner, Cerner, and it's still a company. You can look it up. And all the capital letters and everything this is the way the email came. And you're the manager, one of the managers getting this. Did you get a chance to read it? There is a page 2 to it that goes on. He went on to list six punishments, including laying off 5% of the staff. Hell will freeze over, he vowed, before he would dole out more employee benefits. The parking lot would be his yardstick of success, he said. It should be substantially full at 7:30 and at 6:30. You have 2 weeks, tick tock. So there's the original email, and he went on to explain it. So if put in chat 1 or 2 words, what are 1 or 2 words that came to mind about the CEO? All of us naturally made some interpretations from that, I'm sure. So why don't you just throw into chat disgruntled, all right? Any other interpretations of the CEO you had that came to mind? You got this email? Overbearing, unreasonable tyrant, unprofessional, aggressive and dictatorial, disgust, ornery. Yeah, these, the other point I want to make is we have a real natural, it's built into our human system to interpret behavior, to make inferences on behavior. And it's built into us to make inferences about the character of the person. Most of the things you talked about in chat are related to his character. Ornery, aggressive, dictatorial, unprofessional, overbearing. And these are natural interpretations we make. He may or may not be like that. We don't know. What actually happened in the company, this email was leaked, and the stock in Cerner dropped 22% the next day after this email was leaked out. And then he went on and recovered. He said he was only trying to shake the troops up. He only wanted to let people know how serious it was. He didn't intend to do all that stuff. He just wanted to try and really bring attention to people. And probably people didn't even believe him when he said that. But things got back on track at Cerner. If you could go to Google and type in email firestorm, and you can read a little bit about the case. I think one of the things we did, all of us, was we made inferences. Inferences are interpretations. And our inferences that we make may or may not be accurate. But and we don't tend to question those. They may or may not be accurate, though, the inferences we're making about the CEO. However, in any communication, we tend to make some strong inferences or interpretations of that behavior, which may or may not be accurate. So you can look at interactions and we try and interpret that behavior. And that's why emails are so problematic, because you don't have the two-way communication. So emails or the written word like this that you get are wide open for interpretation on the part of the sender. Have you ever had the experience of sending emails that offended people and you couldn't figure out why? How they interpreted them that way? Or you say, hey, I was just sending an email, I was just explaining things, and people get real offended, or they get upset with emails back and forth. It's because people are interpreting. And one of the why the nonverbal communication contains about 70% of the message is something you say in writing is interpreted very, very differently than something you say face to face and in person. And that's one of the dangers now we face in communication, especially if you're trying to communicate something of a sensitive interpersonal nature in email, because the interpretation is wide open on the other person's part. And what happens, you get this email, I get resentful, I get angry, and that festers in me. And that's what begins to happen when these emails. So I bring your attention to this. There's an expression I like that's called that says it's a Latin expression, scriba manet, verba volent. What it says is the spoken word flies off into space, the written word remains forever. And what that means is when you put something in writing, it really has a much more lasting effect than if you speak. If you criticize someone verbally, many times people forget about that quickly, or you can forget about it. But if it's in writing, there's something about that adds some permanence to it. And people even get more offended, especially if you send a nasty email to somebody and CC their boss or CC other people. And so we really got to watch this, because the reason is that people are able to make assumptions that may or may not be accurate. Any thoughts you have on that? Anyone have any thoughts or questions? I really think this is where communication comes off track, is we tend to make unquestioned assumptions about communications, and we may or may not be accurate. The only person who is the expert on what motivates me is me, not you. So, but you spend a lot of your time making assumptions about how I should or shouldn't, and what is motivating me. And the person that's the expert on my behavior and how it affects you is you. You're the expert. I shouldn't spend all my time making assumptions about how you should react to me. The only real free arena between you and me is behavior. Only you are the expert on your assumptions and your motivations. And the same way, only I am the assumptions. I'm the only expert. So thinking that our arena of free activity is behavior, what we see and what is taking place. Let me do one more, which I love, which is a great email. This was ended up on ABC News, and it's called, whoops. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, this is a woman by the name of Diana Abdullah, who is writing to attorney, turning down a job. And look at the progression of interpretations and language going back and forth. At this time, I am writing to inform you that I will not be accepting your offer. After careful consideration, I have come to the conclusion that the pay you are offering would neither fulfill me nor support the lifestyle I am living in light of the work I would be doing for you. I have decided instead to work for myself and reap 100% of the benefits that I sow. Thank you for the interviews, Diana Abdullah. Now, do you have any interpretations you might make on her email there, that middle paragraph? Is there anything that seems uncomfortable to anyone?
It seems unnecessary to go into, like, her plans to work for herself. She could have just ended it well before that.
Sounds a little elitist almost, or
Yeah.
I don't know. A little arrogant, maybe. Now, all those words I'm using, elitist, arrogant, they're all interpretive words about her character, which may or may not be true. Okay, so, and it's addressed to him and she signs her name. He responded, here was his response. Whoops, wrong way. He sends her Diana, and he's being very informal, Diana and Will. Given that you had 2 interviews, were offered and accepted the job, indeed you had a definite start date, I'm surprised that you chose an email and a 9:30 p.m. voicemail to convey this information to me. That whole communication, that first sentence is pretty good. He's talking about the behavior. And then he goes, the next sentence, it smacks of immaturity and is quite unprofessional. Now he's interpreting her behavior. Remember what I said about judgment and evaluation? Now, he didn't need that sentence. If he would have taken that out and put, indeed, I did rely on your acceptance by ordering stationery and business cards with your name, reformatting a computer, and setting up both internal and external emails for you here at the office. While I do not quarrel with your reasoning, I'm extremely disappointed in the way this played out. That whole email is pretty good, except for that one sentence. Would you agree? Now, what do you think she's going to react to? Shamika, what do you think she'll react to?
I don't know. She might have a I don't care type of attitude. Like you said earlier, arrogant, just by the email that she initially sent.
Yeah.
where I think what stuck out to me that was inappropriate doesn't support my type of lifestyle. I thought that was very unnecessary.
All right. Well, let's read on in the saga. So see how Diana responds to this. These are all emails. Whoops. To Will Corman, notice he signed his will. She says to William A. R.E. Thank you. A real lawyer would have put the contract into writing and not exercise any reliance until he did so. Again, thank you. So they're escalating. She's attacking his character now. Well, if you were any kind of a real lawyer, you would have put it in writing. And then Will writes back to Diana Abdullah Monday, thank you. Thank you for the refresher course on contracts. This is not a bar exam question. You need to realize that this is a very small legal community, especially the criminal defense bar. Do you really want to start pissing off more experienced lawyers at this early stage of your career? And then Diana responds back, blah, blah, blah. So that's the title of that. Before I talk about the principles of communication and get into them, I really think this first part, to me, is just the absolute heart of communication and where communication problems lie. And they lie in the area of the inferences we make and the assumptions we make. And we believe these assumptions are accurate, and we don't tend to question them. And these initial inferences we make or assumptions we make lead to some really tough feelings and resentments, anger, you name it, that may take time to work themselves out. And think of this dynamic when you think about conflict. What we all need to do, especially in difficult conversations, is step back and analyze from this point of view and realize that the only area of free activity between you and me that's 100% accurate are what we can see and observe. So keep that in mind as we talk about the principles, 8 principles of effective communication. In the self-assessment you're asked to fill out, the self-assessment delves into these 8 aspects, and they also delve into what I'm going to finish up with in the discussion of listening and how we respond to people. But let me just quickly go through all of these. Effective communication focuses on the problem, not the person. Let's see how you and I together can solve this problem, not you are the problem. And you noticed in that that email, the email firestorm, there were a lot of personal attacks going on. In the first one, the manager's telling people you don't care, evaluate. They describe, they don't evaluate the behavior. That in one email from the lawyer, he did a great job describing her behavior, what happened when she verbally accepted the job. But then he said, you're immature and unprofessional. Those were evaluative words. And that really drove her up the wall. And when she felt evaluated and judged, that's when the communication ended. We're not saying whether her behavior was right or wrong. It's just that communication ended. So describe, don't evaluate, biggie. Here is what I saw, and this is my reaction. You talked a lot, not you're a loudmouth. Those are very different descriptions. effective communication is specific rather than global. You've been late 3 times this month, rather than you're irresponsible or you're.
Welcome to your NFL headlines of the day.
Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. She comes on every time it says it's 7:00, 7:30. You're irresponsible. Take ownership of your comments. Use I statements. I turned down your request because of these reasons, not, I think it's a good idea, but others didn't want to go along. Own your communication with other people. Ask for input and listen. What can you and I do to solve this problem? Here's the problem. What can we do about it? Consistency between your behavior and your words. This really has me upset. Let's say I'm feeling annoyed. Well, say what you're feeling. In other words, one of the worst things we can cause in people is cognitive dissonance. That's when our words and actions don't matter. Hey, I have an open door. You can come to me with any problem and talk about it. Then you take me up on it and I bite your head off because you did it. That's not a consistency. Effective communication values the other's perspectives, and it's conjunctive, not disjunctive. What that means is that when you come to me with, and I'm going to say more about that when I talk about the various listening responses. Basically, you come to me with a topic, we stay on that topic. I don't change the subject on you. Like you might come to me with a problem, and I might turn around and say, well, I had a similar problem. This is how I handled it. We're not dealing with your problem. You're hearing about me. That's what conjunctive, not disjunctive means. Inferences about other people's motives invite, almost guarantee a defensive response. When I make an inference, my inference might be correct. I'm not saying it isn't, but there always is the possibility that it's wrong. The inference trap. The inference is you don't care what I think is an inference. You did not ask for my opinion is a fact or a statement of behavior. You want all the credit for yourself is an inference versus you didn't mention the other team members during your presentation. That's a behavior. So the text talks about 4 types of listening or responses. And one of the assessments I asked you to look at in your communication with is kind of giving you a assessment on how you use these. And that's one of the things I asked you to comment on. Advising is providing direction or instructions or personal opinion. It's like, here's what I think you should do, or I tell you what to do. And you know, you have a subordinate, someone that reports to you, asks for advice, and you give them advice. Remember, you're the one who takes responsibility. They're not solving the problem on their own. They're taking your advice. Sometimes advice is really important, especially for newcomers. But just remember that in the communication, you're the one that's taken the responsibility as the advice giver. Deflecting, this changes the person's topic to your topic. You know, something similar happened to me last month, or this reminds me of something so-and-so told me. So you're deflecting the conversation. This is one we do quite a bit. The assessment I gave you kind of gets at, do you tend to have one of these you use more than another? Probing is potentially a good one. It shows interest by asking questions and gathering information. So would you tell me more about that? What do you mean when you say this? Do you know why you feel that way? That's a way we can respond. And then the other is probably when they talk about active listening. I don't know if you ever heard the expression active listening. This is when we restate the message in different words that shows we're listening and provide an opportunity to clarify your understanding. It sounds like you're really upset. You really seem to be upset about the schedule change, and you want to discuss alternatives. What you're doing is you're owning up what you're listening and perceiving in the conversation. And you might want to read more on active listening. You can really change your communication by just working on the skill of listening. So effective listeners avoid always using the same response. What I heard you say was avoid serving only as a mimic of what the person is saying. You respond with empathy, you accept, you avoid expressing agreement or disagreement. What you're trying to help the person do is explore. Sometimes all people want to know is they feel listened to. Effective listeners respond first to expressed feelings rather than content. To the other person, expressed feelings are often the most important part of the message. So these I threw in here, I'm not going to go through them, but different kinds of probing responses, which shows you're trying to get the person to talk more about the situation. And the book talks a little bit about the difference between a counseling or a coaching situation. What they mean in coaching situations, you're really trying to give advice to the person in doing their job, where a counseling, I don't like the word counseling here. It's not like you're their therapist. What it means is you're dealing with attitude issues or those kind of things. And the way this chart reads, advising is the most direct response and most closed response in listening, and reflecting is the most non-directive and open response. Some would say that's the active listening response. So, and here's a little chart on the 8 steps. So that's what I have for tonight. Any thoughts or questions you might have on this? Anything, anyone? Any questions on what's happening in the course so far? You have a lot of things due this week, I know. One is the contract. If any of you have any thoughts on the skill area you're working on, feel free to drop me a note. On that, I wanted to get that skill contract and that you might be working on. Some of you might have some from the stress management stuff you talked about. I'm asking you to do that worksheet on all the assessments. Those assessments are that you're doing are pretty important in constructing in beginning to construct the Inc. paper. I'm asking you to write the skill analysis paper. And then I have an assignment for you on the communication. Also, if you got into it, you should be aware there's a discussion board that's part of this assignment. I had put 2 discussions in I wanted you to respond to before Thursday or Friday, I think. So take a look at those. All right. The other thing I wanted to mention, next week we're covering decision making, the following week power. The last week of the week after that, we're going to do groups and teams. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you into a group. There's 15 in the class, and I'm going to break you into a group of 7. and a group of 8. And I'm gonna ask you to find a time when you could all come together in a group of 7 or a group of 8. And we can do this over a week, hopefully over one of the week we could do it. I'll make myself available for whatever hour you pick. But I'm gonna set up a little group discussion where you can decide as a group of 7 or 8, a meeting time. That it's gonna be for about an hour and 15 minutes. Where you could all sign on. That's the only way I could think of doing the group dynamic group topic, and I think we have a good way of. I'm going to ask you to make a decision as a group, and you'll be able, and we'll film it, so you'll be able to get a way of analyzing how you operate as a group. All right. Anyone have any questions or anything? Nathan, Zach, Joe, Doug, Shamika, Tim, Adam, Katie, anything there? All right.
Nope.
Nope. All
Nope.
good.
All good. Okay. Well, have a good night, a good rest of the week, and I'll send you some notes on next week. I think next week what I'm going to do is just because of the nature of next week. I'm asking you to do some things that carry on in the week. I'm not going to do an hour-long session like this. I'll have a few things recorded for you to help you through the different stuff next week. All right. Off. We'll see you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.